Today, I wanted to introduce a new series that I like to call Climate Injustice. I think in the series, we will examine the impact of climate change and aspects of the built environment with a critical eye on equity and disproportionate impacts on vulnerable communities. So, if I were to ask you all which natural disaster or weather-related disaster causes the most deaths each year, which would you guess it is? Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires? Actually, it's none of those. It's extreme heat. In fact, according to the EPA, some statistical approaches estimate more than 1,300 deaths per year in the US are due to extreme heat. So you might not ask, how does this happen? Why is extreme heat deadly? And how do temperatures get to extreme levels? Well, it all goes back to climate change. We know that climate change is driven by increasing greenhouse gas emissions. The primary sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are actually transportation and electricity production. So think exhaust from cars and planes, methane from cows, energy production from coal and natural gas factories. All of these increase our greenhouse gas emissions. These greenhouse gases in the atmosphere absorb heat radiation, effectively trapping more heat in Earth's atmosphere, which causes the average temperature to rise all over the world. We're gonna get technical for a second. So, since 1901, the average surface temperature, so the temperature we feel here at Earth's surface, across the US has risen at an average rate of 0.16 degrees Fahrenheit per decade, with the greatest change happening after 1970. And the warmest years happening after 1998. I think 2012 and 2016 are two of the hottest years on record. On a global scale, we see a similar pattern, except the US is warmed at a much faster rate. I know 0.16 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't sound like much, but change like this, especially at the planet scale, can have a wide range of effects on us humans and on ecosystems. I figured we'd start with extreme heat because when we think climate change, we think global warming, and with global warming, we think rising temperatures. According to the American Society of Landscape Architects, rising temperatures intensify environmental threats such as drought and rising sea levels. And so higher average temperatures also lead to more energy use and exacerbate pollution, which in turn increases health risks. We see rising temperatures, especially in urban areas, which warm at a faster rate than non-urban areas due to a phenomenon called the urban heat island effect. This effect occurs when cities replace natural land cover with dense concentrations of impermeable surfaces. So think pavement and buildings and other surfaces that sort of absorb and retain heat. This phenomenon increases energy costs. For example, to cool our buildings, we need air conditioning in our buildings themselves. This phenomenon also increases air pollution levels, whether from the energy production from the air conditioning or from the exhaust from our vehicles in our cities themselves. And more importantly, this phenomena increases heat-related illnesses and mortality. When we look at extreme heat with our equity lenses, we also find that it is a huge equity issue. Low-income and communities of color are more likely to live in neighborhoods with older buildings, meaning less likely to have air conditioning or adequate insulation systems, low tree cover, meaning less parks and even trees on the sidewalks, more heat-retaining surfaces, and limited access to coping strategies such as air conditioning or cooling centers or rec centers, and even fountains to just sort of bring the average temperature down. Here is a really cool visual from the New York Times, which I'll link below, that shows how extreme heat became an equity issue today. In the 1930s, banks and federal officials used a practice known as redlining to mark black neighborhoods as risky investments. Today, those same neighborhoods are some of the hottest parts of town with little tree cover and tons of pavement and impermeable surfaces. Whereas, whiter neighborhoods that weren't redlined are much cooler today. We see this practice and pattern appear in cities all across the country today. I'll link below a New York Times article that compares extreme heat and tree cover in neighborhoods all across the US, but we're gonna look at Baltimore for a second. In Baltimore, as in many of these other cities, decades of discriminatory housing and transportation policies have led to poorer, predominantly African American neighborhoods to bear the brunt of extreme heat. When we compare Roland Park, greener, leafier, wealthier neighborhood with higher life expectancies and have higher average incomes, with sections of East and West Baltimore which lack tree cover and are located next to busy highways, we find that the neighborhoods in sections of East and West Baltimore are 15 degrees hotter than that of those enrolled in parks and other parts of northern Baltimore. We can look at this map here and see that the lack of tree cover is clear. In whatever city you're in, next time you're out, pay attention to the type of cover the type of tree cover present or absent. How close is the nearest park? Do bus stops have shading infrastructure? What do your cities look like? What do your neighborhoods look like? Does it feel hotter in the summertime? Do certain areas feel hotter than different areas? And what does that say about the infrastructure and the distribution of resources available in the neighborhoods that you live in? So, what do solutions look like? What does it mean for us to address extreme heat? One thing we can do is build more permeable surfaces to allow water to flow and build more green infrastructure. This looks like green roofs and green streets, rain gardens, and more parks. The greener an area, the cooler the area will be. When we build more green infrastructure, however, it's important we make equity-informed decisions, asking which areas are lacking the most cover right now. There are several organizations running analyses to determine the best places to plant more trees and to build more parks. One near me in the Bay Area is Canopy. Are there any organizations near you doing this work? And how can you help? Can you go and volunteer to plant trees yourself? Another way to address extreme heat is to look at the materials we use to build themselves. Whether building with more permeable materials or adding reflective coating to create structures like cool pavements or cool walls. Besides building smart and cool surfaces, we can also build more cooling centers. We could retrofit existing buildings to ensure that they withstand rising temperatures. However, we need to be careful when we do this without inducing more emissions through energy production. We can't just make rooms and just pump more air conditioning, because then that's going to increase our energy production, thereby increasing our greenhouse gas emissions up the stream. All of these strategies are in response to the fact that temperatures are rising. Another set of strategies do exist where instead of just responding to rising temperatures, we can actually work to mitigate the warming itself. Since transportation is one of the largest greenhouse gas emission sources in the US, designing in such a way that reduces how much we drive can actually make a big impact on reducing the issue of global warming itself. This looks like more transit-oriented development, more infill development, in a way we're developing in such a way that encourages people to drive less, making it easier to move around without being so dependent on our cars. Now, we cannot afford to just piecemeal solutions. You know, me getting a solar panel here doesn't make that big of a dent. We need neighborhood-wide, city-wide, statewide, and nationwide efforts if we want to do this effectively, especially when it comes to thinking about how expensive it could be, you know? And finally, we need to be there for each other during heat waves. You know, we need to be able to support our neighbors who might need help, elderly folks and vulnerable communities who might need folks during extreme heat events. Now, this sort of leads to like this whole other side of extreme heat, you know, which is like the public health response, the healthcare, the policies in place. You know, everyone has some sort of role to play when we think about whenever we're experiencing these sort of weather-related events. And so I want you to think about like whatever field you're in, you know, and think about ways you can make an impact and in what ways that you do interact with extreme heat. You know, what are you in the healthcare field? Are you in policy? You know, are you not involved with any of those fields? Well, are there any neighborhoods or are there any organizations near you that are planting trees and like building parks? Like, you can just go and volunteer and help them out. Like, that's doing something. You are playing a part in addressing, you know, climate change, you know, and in specifically with extreme heat. Now, that's all I have for now. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment on ways that you can help address extreme heat in the neighborhoods that you live in or in the cities that you live in, and what do the cities you live in look like I said earlier. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.